30,000 feet above the Indian Ocean, a passenger reclines in a seat that converts into a flat bed, orders a meal designed by a Michelin-starred chef, and watches a screen larger than most laptop monitors. The airline operating that flight was not founded by a century of aviation tradition. It was built in a desert city that, in 1993, did not have a functioning national carrier. And today, it holds the title of World's Best Airline more times than any other in history. But here is what that story hides. Two airlines, two cities, separated by less than 200 miles of coastline. One shared ambition: to own the sky between Asia, Europe, and Africa. And between them, one of the most consequential and least understood rivalries in the history of commercial aviation. Not just a competition for passengers, a competition for what kind of power a small nation can project when it has no army large enough to matter, but enough capital to reshape the architecture of global movement. We will walk through 3 layers of this rivalry. The symptom, which is the battle for routes and awards. The trigger, which is the blockade that changed everything. And the fracture beneath them both, which is the question of what an airline actually is when the nation that owns it has no other way to exist in the world. If you've ever wondered why the most important geopolitical contest in the Gulf doesn't happen in palaces or parliaments, but in aircraft cabins and terminal lounges, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Emirates launched in 1985 with 2 aircraft and a guarantee from the Dubai government. Qatar Airways relaunched in 1997 after a change in leadership transformed it from a regional curiosity into a declared global ambition. Akbar Al-Baker, the airline's chief executive, was not subtle about the target. He did not want to build a good airline. He wanted to build the best airline in the world, and he pointed at Emirates as the measure. For a decade, the rivalry was asymmetric. Emirates had the scale. By 2005, it was already operating routes to 60 countries. Qatar Airways was growing fast, but starting from a smaller base, a smaller airport, a smaller city. Dubai's geography was an advantage that seemed insurmountable. It sits at the precise longitude where a single hub can reach 2/3 of the world's population within an 8-hour flight. Doha sits barely 200 miles away. The math appeared to favor Dubai. It always appeared to favor Dubai. Then, something happened that no analyst predicted and no airline could have planned for. On June 5, 2017, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt severed all diplomatic and transport relations with Qatar overnight. They closed their airspace. They closed their borders. Qatar Airways lost access to 29 destinations it served through Saudi, Emirati, Bahraini, and Egyptian airspace. Planes had to be rerouted around the entire Arabian Peninsula. Flights that took 2 hours suddenly took 4. Routes that were profitable became operationally impossible. The assumption that a Gulf airline could always rely on its neighborhood vanished in a single morning. Here is the question no one was asking loudly enough at the time. When your country's most important company is an airline and your neighbors close the sky, what do you do next? Qatar Airways did not shrink. It recalculated. The blockade forced something that ambition alone might never have produced. A complete rethinking of what Qatar Airways needed to be. If it could not rely on the Gulf as a transit zone, it needed to make Hamad International Airport, the Doha hub, so compelling, so technically superior, so undeniably excellent that passengers from London and New York and Singapore would choose to connect through Doha, not because it was convenient, but because the experience itself justified the detour. The airline poured investment into cabin product during the blockade years. The Q-Suite, Qatar's business class offering, had launched in 2017, almost simultaneously with the diplomatic crisis. Its double-bed configuration, the first in the industry, its privacy doors, its convertible suite walls that allowed 4 seats to become a shared social space, these were not incremental improvements. They were a categorical claim. Qatar Airways was not competing on price or frequency. It was competing on the proposition that the journey itself was worth choosing. Emirates had long held that position. The Emirates first-class suite, the onboard bar in its Airbus, a 380, the shower spa at altitude, these had defined luxury aviation for a generation. But the Q-Suite absorbed the awards cycle. Skytrax named Qatar Airways the world's best airline in 2021, 2022, and again in 2024. It had already held the title in 2011, 2012, 2015, and 2017. 8 times. No carrier in history has won it more often. Does a Skytrax trophy change a route map? No, but it changes the conversation in every corporate travel department on Earth. And corporate travel is where the margin lives. Leave the awards behind for a moment and look at what the blockade restructured in terms of reach. Qatar Airways accelerated its investment in other airlines during the crisis years and immediately after. It took a stake in IAG, the parent company of British Airways and Iberia. It built a position in LATAM Airlines, the dominant carrier across South America. It took equity in Cathay Pacific, connecting it to Hong Kong's role as a gateway to China. It moved on Air Italy. It attempted to acquire a stake in Indigo, the largest airline in India by passenger volume. Not all of these investments succeeded without friction. The Indian aviation regulator blocked the Indigo deal. The LATAM stake became complicated when the airline entered bankruptcy protection in 2020, but the pattern was unmistakable. Qatar Airways was not simply trying to fly to more places, it was trying to own pieces of the architecture that controlled access to those places. If you cannot overfly Saudi Arabia, you find another way to be present where Saudi Arabia's passengers want to go. You buy into the carrier that already serves them. Emirates pursued a different logic. Dubai's strategy was always built around the super jumbo. The Airbus, a 380, with its 400 to 500 seats and its upper deck, was the aircraft that Dubai had bet its entire hub model on. Emirates became by far the largest operator of the A380 in history, taking delivery of over 120 aircraft. The plane made the Emirates hub model work. Fill an enormous aircraft at Dubai, fly it to every major city on Earth, and let the connecting traffic from across the region and South Asia feed into it. Then 2 forces arrived simultaneously, and neither was favorable. First, the A380 itself became commercially difficult. Airbus announced in 2019 that it would halt production of the aircraft, unable to find enough buyers beyond Emirates to justify continued manufacturing. The Super Jumbo had been positioned as the future of aviation. It became, instead, a monument to a particular theory of hub concentration that the market was moving away from. Airlines were shifting toward the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A350, wide-body twin-engine aircraft that could fly long routes economically without requiring a massive hub to fill them. Point-to-point flying was gaining ground over hub and spoke. Emirates had built its entire identity around the hub and spoke model at the most extreme possible scale. Second, the pandemic erased 5 years of passenger growth in 18 months. When aviation restarted, the recovery was uneven. Emirates had a fleet optimized for mass volume into a market that was recovering slowly. Qatar Airways, with a younger and more diversified fleet, and with the Airbus A350 as its flagship long-haul aircraft, was structurally better positioned for the post-pandemic demand curve. And then came the paint dispute. In 2021, Qatar Airways grounded a portion of its A350 fleet after discovering that the outer paint layer was delaminating from the aircraft surface in a way that, according to the airline, exposed the carbon fiber beneath and created a potential lightning strike risk. Qatar Airways notified the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. The agency concluded the issue did not pose an immediate airworthiness risk. Airbus disagreed with Qatar Airways' interpretation. Qatar Airways grounded 21 aircraft anyway and filed a claim against Airbus that reached, at its highest estimate, over $1 billion. Airbus responded by suspending deliveries of the A350 to Qatar Airways, and, in what escalated the confrontation into open legal warfare, terminated a separate order for 50 Airbus. A 321neo aircraft worth approximately $6 billion. Qatar Airways sued in English courts. Airbus countersued. Here is why this matters beyond the legal dispute itself. Qatar Airways was fighting simultaneously on 4 fronts: the aftermath of the blockade, the pandemic recovery, the fleet dispute with its primary manufacturer, and the ongoing competition with Emirates for the most valuable long-haul routes on Earth. Most airlines would not survive 2 of those simultaneously. Qatar Airways ran a profit in the financial year ending March 2023, its largest ever recorded at the time, exceeding $1.5 billion. Emirates posted a profit of $2.9 billion in the same period. The numbers are close. For 2 airlines that were not supposed to be comparable at all 2 decades ago, the distance between them is now measurable in single-digit billions rather than in structural categories. What does this rivalry actually reveal about the cities that built it? Dubai built Emirates as an expression of a city that wanted to be the center of everything. The logic was spatial and commercial. Put the hub in the right place, build the infrastructure, fill the planes, and the city becomes indispensable. For 30 years, that logic worked with extraordinary precision. Emirates became the proof that a city with no historical reason to be a global crossroads could manufacture that status through capital, will, and an airport designed to handle the entire premise. Qatar built Qatar Airways as something slightly different. Not just a hub, but a statement. A small country of under 3 million citizens, in a region where the largest neighbors were capable of closing the sky overnight, needed to demonstrate, continuously and visibly, that it could not be made irrelevant. The airline is not separate from Qatari foreign policy. It is an instrument of it. Every code-share agreement, every equity stake, every best airline award is a signal to the region and to the world. You cannot isolate us because we have made ourselves too embedded in how the world moves to be isolated. The 2017 blockade was meant to pressure Qatar into compliance. Instead, it accelerated the one thing Qatar Airways was already becoming: a network that does not depend on its neighbors' permission to function. Would you keep paying into a system that your neighbors can shut off with a single political decision? Or would you build around it so completely that the switch no longer exists? That is the question Qatar answered with its airline. And the answer has cost billions. And the answer has worked. Here is what remains unresolved. Both airlines are wholly owned by their governments. Neither operates under the financial discipline that a privately held airline must sustain. The question of whether either model is commercially viable in the long run, absent the sovereign capital that backstops losses and finances fleets, is a question neither city has had to answer yet. When oil revenues plateau, when sovereign wealth funds face competing demands, when the subsidy that makes ultra-premium aviation economics possible becomes politically difficult to sustain, the logic of both models faces a stress test that routes and awards cannot simulate. A flight from London to Sydney, two connecting options, Doha and Dubai, separated by less than 200 miles. Both beautiful, both engineered to perfection, both owned by governments that need them to project a version of themselves that costs more than any purely commercial airline could afford. The seat is real. The food is real. The flat bed is real. The question of how long both can remain what they claim to be is the one that neither airline puts in its brochure. If this analysis changed how you understand what an airline actually is, share it with someone who still thinks this is just a story about premium cabins and in-flight menus. It is not. It is a story about two cities that decided their survival depended on controlling a corridor in the sky, and about what happens when that kind of ambition meets the limit of geography, politics, and capital simultaneously. If you want to keep reading the trajectory before the headlines catch up, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. This channel exists for the people who are not satisfied with the surface. The content of this video is based on strategic analysis reports, estimated data, and hypothetical scenarios regarding the economic and geopolitical context. The information is offered for reference, independent analysis, and documentary storytelling purposes. It does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. The images and materials used serve to illustrate the arguments.